Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Louisa. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe, and if you're coming back, welcome back. And today, as you can see, I am at the beach, which is why my hair's all beachy. I honestly don't know why people use those salt sprays in their hair. Maybe they want to look like this. But anyway, that's not the topic for today. Today we're getting into the next chapter of the book of Daniel. And this one actually has like a very famous sort of scene or cultural reference in it that a lot of people are familiar with, but they don't know where it comes from. And so many people, without knowing anything about Christianity or the Bible, they talk about, oh, you know, this happened and the writing was on the wall and we knew it was all over, etc., etc. This is the origin of that saying. So hopefully you've got a cup of coffee or something and you're ready to settle in, and we'll read this together. We're in Daniel chapter 5, and I don't have my physical Bible with me, so we're reading the NIV version today. King Belshazzar gave a great banquet for 1,000 of his nobles and drank wine with them. While Belshazzar was drinking his wine, he gave orders to bring in the gold and silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines, might drink from them. So they brought in the gold goblets that had been taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines, drank from them. As they drank the wine, they praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. So, this is a pretty big faux pas. Essentially, what they're doing is desecrating the sacred and holy items from the Jerusalem temple. And obviously, they were made out of precious metals, which is why he wanted to use them. But these items were consecrated, they were made holy, and they're only to be used for God and for the purposes of the holy sacrifices and things like that. They're not for ordinary use. They're not vessels for everyday drinking where people can just like party up and get drunk and talk crap. So not only is the king, who is apparently the son of Nebuchadnezzar and did not listen to anything that his dad told him, apparently. Not only is he using holy items for unholy purposes, but he's also celebrating false gods in the process. So venerating the gods of material things. And we can kind of imagine what the outcome of this is going to be, but it tells us what the outcome of this is going to be. So from verse 5 it says, "Suddenly the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall near the lampstand in the royal palace. The king watched the hand as it wrote. His face turned pale and he was so frightened that his legs became weak and his knees were knocking. The king summoned the enchanters, astrologers and diviners. Then he said to these wise men of Babylon, 'Whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around his neck, and he will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom.' Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or tell the king what it meant. So King Belshazzar became even more terrified and his face grew more pale. His nobles were baffled. The queen, hearing the voices of the kings and his nobles, came into the banquet hall. 'May the king live forever,' she said. 'Don't be alarmed, don't look so pale. There is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. In the time of your father he was found to have insight and intelligence and wisdom like that of the gods. Your father, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed him chief of the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. He did this because Daniel, whom the king called Belteshazzar, was found to have a keen mind and knowledge and understanding, and also the ability to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve difficult problems. Call for Daniel, and he will tell you what the writing means.'" So apparently someone in this kingdom has some sense, or at least remembers the recent past, But for some reason, it's not the king's son, and it's not any of his nobles or his wise men or astrologers. And so that's interesting. It's actually the queen. The queen is the only one who remembers who actually can do these things. So Daniel was brought before the king, and the king said to him, "Are you Daniel, one of the exiles my father the king brought from Judah? I have heard that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that you have insight, intelligence, and outstanding wisdom. The wise men and enchanters were brought before me to read this writing and tell me what it means, but they could not explain it. Now I have heard that you are able to give interpretations and to solve difficult problems. If you can read this writing and tell me what it means, you will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around your neck, and you will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom." Then Daniel answered the king, "You may keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. Nevertheless, I will read the writing for the king and tell him what it means." It's interesting that at this point in his life, Daniel is not really interested in getting any kind of recognition or reward for his contribution. He used to accept it from Nebuchadnezzar, but he doesn't want anything from this particular king. And perhaps it's because of what the message is. Perhaps he feels like, I can't be honest and accept all of these offerings. But, he does the right thing by the king, and he gives him the interpretation. And that goes back to what I was saying in the first couple of videos. This is how Christians and God's people should conduct themselves in Babylon. It's not good to be constantly antagonistic with people and to not really open up to them about God, even if you think there's terrible consequences for doing so. So from verse 18 it says, "Your Majesty, the Most High God, gave your father Nebuchadnezzar sovereignty and greatness and glory and splendor. Because of the high position he gave him, all the nations and peoples of every language dreaded and feared him. Those the king wanted to put to death, he put to death. Those he wanted to spare, he spared. Those he wanted to promote, he promoted. And those he wanted to humble, he humbled. But when his heart became arrogant and hardened with pride, he was deposed from his royal throne and stripped of his glory. He was driven away from people and given the mind of an animal. He lived with the wild donkeys and ate grass like the ox, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven, until he acknowledged that the Most High God is sovereign over all kingdoms of earth and sets over them any one he wishes. But you, Belshazzar, his son, have not humbled yourself, though you knew all this. Instead, you have set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. You had the goblets from his temple brought to you, and you and your nobles, your wives, and your concubines drank from them. You praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which cannot see or hear or understand. But you did not honor the God who holds in his hand your life and all your ways. Therefore he sent the hand that wrote the inscription. This is the inscription that was written: Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. Here is what these words mean. Mene, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighted on the scales and found wanting. Perez, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. It's interesting that on one line it says Parsin and on another line it says Perez, but that's what it says, so I'm just reading it. So this is the bad news that Daniel had to deliver. He had to confront the king and say, all of this happened to your dad. God gave him all of this stuff. He had all of this glory and splendor and power. And instead of acknowledging who gave it to him, he went off in pride and arrogance, and God humbled him. So, knowing all of this, why would you mess with God like that? And I think it's really interesting that, God revealed himself over the course of time with Nebuchadnezzar. He showed himself through a prophetic dream, and he sent Daniel to interpret the dream. And then he showed himself with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. And then he showed himself again by reducing Nebuchadnezzar to a beast. And when Nebuchadnezzar finally got it and acknowledged God, then that was essentially a testimony for everyone else. And the fact that Nebuchadnezzar's son is ignoring the testimony of his father, he's not going to get his own testimony. God isn't reaching out to this guy individually because he reached out to his dad, and his dad had a powerful testimony. So it goes straight from, you have seen what happened to your dad, you know what he declared about God, and yet you trifled with God. It's just gone straight from someone else's testimony to now your time's up. You had all of the information that you needed, you had all of the revelation that you needed, and it wasn't sufficient for you. So I'm not going to waste my time trying to reach you. I'm just going to tell you that it's over. So it's very interesting to see how God deals with different people at different times, because, you know, it's like what Jesus said, a faithless generation looks for a sign or demands a sign. And that's the thing, like, there are some people who are like, you know, you've told me your testimony, and your testimony is fantastic. It's so powerful, etc., etc. I want that kind of proof. I'm not going to believe until I have that kind of experience. Now, you weren't necessarily looking for that. You weren't demanding that. You weren't trying to find that. But because you were given that, now I feel entitled to have the same thing. And if God's not going to give that to me, I'm not going to believe in him. That is a very dangerous attitude to have. That is the sort of attitude that will get God's back up, like seriously piss him off. So, what is the outcome? Well, from verse 29 it says, "Then at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was clothed in purple, a gold chain was placed around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest ruler of the kingdom." So he was good to his word. He gave the reward that he promised to people. But it's not going to mean very much, because in the next verse it says, "That very night, Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. So this officially marks the very end of the Babylonian Empire. And then we see the transition from Babylon to Medo-Persia. So if we go back to the first video in the series, this goes back to the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had about the statue. And the statue had the head of gold, which was his kingdom, his Babylon. And then it went into the kingdom of silver, which was Medo-Persia. And interestingly enough, it's the arms and chest, and it's usually portrayed like this. So they're not like separate arms. They're actually like intertwined with each other, but they are technically two separate kingdoms that came together. They formed an alliance and they created a whole new empire. And so this empire is very, very, very influential in the story of Israel. And we will get into more of the prophecies about what happens to Israel with all of these different successive empires that rise and fall over the centuries. And but that's later on. We're almost getting to the end of, like, basically the description of Daniel's dealings in Babylon. and then we'll be getting straight into like just pure prophecy. So that was a bit of a short one, but hopefully very interesting, and some food for thought certainly in amongst that. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't done that already, and I will see you for the next one. Bye.